On the 26th of August, President Uhuru Kenyatta issued this directive.
Following the allegations of impropriety at the Kenya Medical Supplies Authority, better known as KEMSA, the relevant investigative agencies of our country are currently fully seized with the matter. However, given the compelling public interest on the matter, the relevant agencies should expedite their ongoing investigations and conclude the same within 21 days from the date hereof.
Those investigations were handed over to the Director of Public Prosecutions after roughly 25 days. But what's interesting about that specific directive is that it's very reminiscent of previous orders issued by the President, especially on issues of corruption.
And I have already given an order that any or all foreigners who are either suspected of having engaged in issues to deal with drug trafficking be deported and they go back to their own countries and do their business there.
So therefore, also to fortify our protection of the family as the foundation of the state, I also further direct and order the National Crime Research Center to probe 3 issues. First is the escalating cases of gender-based violence. The second is the worrying trend of cases where the girl child has been disempowered. And the third is the violation of children's rights.
Are the President's directives bound by law? Are they effective? And can Kenyans hold him accountable if his directives are not implemented?
So there are certain times when what he says is through constitutional mandate or through other legal mandate.
He's talking about Articles 130 to 132 of the Constitution, which give the President the authority to issue executive orders, especially on the organization of the executive arm of the government. Oh, and that is Abdikadir Mohammed, former senior advisor to the President on legal and constitutional matters.
When the Constitution or an act of Parliament gives the President power or authority to do X, when he does that X, it can be through an executive order. So the executive order will say, I, XYZ, as the President, based on the powers bestowed on me by either the Constitution or that particular law, hereby do XYZ or direct XYZ. So for example, in the way the President organizes his arm of government, the executive, how many ministers he wants, which departments will be in which ministry, which parastatal will fall under which ministry, what the names of the ministries will be, that typically is given under an executive order.
It's very easy to confuse executive orders, presidential directives, and presidential proclamations. Executive orders are usually gazetted, which means that they bind the public through a law or regulation. Since coming into office in 2013, President Uhuru Kenyatta has issued about 23 executive orders. He's used them to organize his cabinet, give instructions on government procurement, and amidst controversy between him and his deputy, he issued an executive order placing the deputy president's office under the office of the president, which is well within his authority. It's very crucial that executive orders respect the spirit of the Constitution. Both the judiciary and parliament can challenge the president's executive order if it goes against the law. Now, executive orders are very different from presidential directives. When the president issues a directive, usually in his speeches, without gazetting it, it is usually instructions to the public service, kind of like this one.
I also hereby direct that the Ministry of Health within the next 30 days must come up with a transparent, open method and mechanism through which all tenders and procurement done by KEMSA are available online.
While these directives are important to those working within the government, they do not have a binding effect on the public. Also, presidential directives are often the most abused. So for instance, When the president orders or directs investigating or prosecuting agencies to conclude on a matter within a certain time frame, it may be an overstep of the power or authority given to him by the Constitution.
The Director of Public Prosecutions is an independent organ, it's an independent office, and prosecution falls under the Director of Public Prosecutions. So purely legally speaking, the president may not order X person to be prosecuted. The president can say that you should investigate, could say, please go ahead and investigate, but the president cannot say, I want Asha Mulu prosecuted tomorrow.
Directives could also mean, do not necessarily have a binding order, a binding effect, but they could have a moral or persuasive value. If the president, for instance, directs the Director of Public Prosecution to expedite prosecution of corruption cases, that cannot be termed as an executive order, because the Constitution does not give him such kind of powers. But it may be considered as a moral appeal to another independent arm of another independent constitutional organ to perform the functions that the Constitution has mandated it to perform expeditiously. It is not any different from Wanjiko out there calling on DCI to expedite investigation.
There's a very good example of this. In August 2019, the president responded to claims of corruption at the Music Copyright Society of Kenya by giving this directive.
Na jana mimi niliamurisha DCI na watu ya EACC waanze upelelezi huko, tujue kama kuna shida huko ya watu kuwa wanakula.
So, does it mean that the president's directive was as good as Papa John's tweet about MCSK?
When the public screams for action as far as corruption is concerned, the sayings, the words of the president are very weighty, and the public expects him to do something about corruption. Now, his pronouncements will help, but in the actual nitty-gritty, the investigation is to be done by investigative agencies, the police, the ESCC, and the prosecution is to be done by the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the judging of whether somebody is guilty or innocent is undertaken by the judiciary.
I know what you're thinking. It sounds like the president doesn't have much power or authority to tackle corruption. I mean, if the prosecuting and investigating agencies are independent, what else can he do other than urge them to speed up their processes?
The president can provide political leadership and ensure that the people that he has put in offices or who are responsible for public resources, whenever those public resources are squandered, they are fired.
The president doesn't need an executive order to fire a minister. He can fire him or her without any with a blink of an eye. If the president really wants to lead the war on corruption from the front, he can fire anybody who has any whiff of corruption. The tone at the top is very critical for the war on graft. So if he wanted, he can say as an order that if there's anything, you will have to step aside. Of course, they are Kenyans, they deserve to be given their fair shot. But if the president really wanted to send that example, he doesn't require anything other than his action.
Dismissing a public officer that the president has appointed or a state officer that the president has appointed is not the same thing as having a finding of criminal culpability.
So, has the president ever abused the executive power or directive? It's debatable. But Executive Order Number 1 of 2020 stirred quite the debate for what many claimed was an infringement of the separation of powers.
Some people have not been very happy with some of the areas they have been used for. Other people have not understood them very well. For example, there has been a controversy recently about whether the judiciary or certain commissioners were being brought under the executive. Actually, what the president was saying is, I want the executive branch of government organized in this fashion. Remember, the executive branch of government is essentially 95% of government.
Finally, we have the presidential proclamations. These are often directives that are time-bound. For example, when the president orders that flags will fly at half-mast to mourn a public figure, it's deemed a proclamation. or when the president issues a proclamation announcing the death of the former president, or a proclamation on the day of national prayer. There you have it. The next time the president issues an order or a directive, you know what to make of it.